Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to RPGB. My name is Mo Williams. I'm here with the very respected and legendary James Introcaso, the lead game designer of MCDM. He's worked on D&D products, Explorer's Guide to Waldemont. He's worked on Cobalt Press projects. He's also the co-creator of Burn Bright, which shout out to Burn Bright.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah. And I also saw that you did some promotional TV for Nat Geo, which I was very excited about.
Oh yeah. I did. I worked in television promos when I started working in RPGs and for many years before. So I wrote and produced a lot of stuff for National Geographic and then eventually for Discovery and PBS and similar channels like that for a long time. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
We are here today to talk about DrawSteel, the upcoming new RPG from MCDM Productions. So, for those who don't know you, James, how did you get involved with MCDM?
Yeah. So, as a young kid, I loved Dungeons and Dragons. And then as a young adult, I tried often to submit to Dungeons and Dragons magazine and got roundly rejected. So, and then when 5th edition came out, I started making a bunch of stuff on my own, freelance. And that got the notice of a bunch of different companies, including Wizards of the Coast and a bunch of the places you mentioned and MCDM. And so they actually had an open call for writers and they were paying more freelance writers than I had ever seen before. And I thought, I have to do this. I have to apply to work here. And it also had a lot to do with the fact that I knew Matt Colville's reputation and I knew Strongholds and Followers had just come out at that point, right? They had done the Kickstarter and it had come out. And so there was a lot of respect for MCDM. And I thought, okay, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. So I started working with them as a freelancer through that. Like I applied to a job through an application process. And started to work with them freelance on A Player's Guide to Capital, which still hasn't come out yet. And then from there, worked on Kingdoms of Warfare. And while I was working on Kingdoms of Warfare with them, Matt said to me, hey, would you like to come work full time? We have this idea for a magazine. We have this idea for this. It would be awesome to work together and you could come be the lead designer here. And I was like, I would love that. That's awesome. The only thing is I don't want to make 5th edition stuff forever. And he said, neither do I. And I said, awesome. And so we have been working together since. That was about almost 5 years ago now that we had that conversation. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So instead of getting into Dungeon Magazine, you made your own magazine.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
I mean, I think it's important to talk about like how often at the beginning, especially, you can get rejected from things. And, it's just like they tell this to actors, right? I used to work in a casting department at a regional theater here in Philadelphia. And they tell actors like, treat auditioning like it is your job. Because you may not get to play the role ever again, but you get to play it right then when you are auditioning.
Yeah.
You get to play that role. And so that's how I think about pitching and cold pitches and applications. You may not get to write about fairies or wizards or capital, right? Ever again. So enjoy doing it now and have fun during the process. And you'll learn a bunch of stuff. And I sure did from all those rejections. So it was great.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good advice for people who are, because a lot of our fans are people trying to write things and create things. And I think that the sort of ideas that you have to be somebody big to start that process. And so it's good to hear from someone like you who kind of worked from the bottom up, just started making things because you liked it.
Yeah. And I mean, the internet age is a gift and a curse, but one of the gifts is that no one can tell you can't make something and share it, right? Like you can, if you have an idea for something cool and nobody is saying you're not barred, right? You don't need to get into a Barnes and Noble. You don't need to find a publisher to make it. You can make it yourself. And that's how I started making stuff. I was like, okay. And I learned so much from that. And then people approached me and they were like, hey, let's work together. And so, yeah, it's a great time to in RPGs. And the one thing you learn once you really get started making stuff is that the RPG industry is actually very small, and that like there's people who you're like, oh, I could never approach them or I would never work with them. And it's like, actually, you might, because you're about one convention away from learning everybody's name and them learning your name. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's good. So let's switch over to DrawSteel. What so for those who don't know, like how did this idea come about that you and Matt were going to make this game?
Yeah, so this is actually something we started working on. I mean, we've been talking about what this might look like since my first year at MCDM, right? And then it was like summer of 2022, 2021. I think it was 2022. Yes. We had this conversation in summer of 2022 where we were like, okay, let's sit down and let's actually talk about what is it we want to make. And we, through some previous conversations, we knew we wanted to make a fantasy role-playing game because we both like fantasy. We both have a lot of ideas about fantasy. We knew we wanted to make it heroic, right? Because we both like that heroic fantasy feel, right? Of like, hey, you're not just crawling into a dungeon and getting treasure, which, by the way, I also like and Matt also likes. We love that kind of game too.
Yeah.
But we were like, I think a lot of people want to play a more heroic game. And a lot of games they're playing right now have the baggage of the dungeon crawling days that prevent them from feeling more heroic. And then we said we're grid day and miniature gamers, right? Like we love to bust out the grid and the minis and stuff, so we like tactical things. And so through that conversation we came up with like, okay, this should be it was all over the crowdfunder now and it's something that people say, but like from the beginning it was there, and they're sort of our guideposts. Like we want it to be a tactical, cinematic, right? Because we like role-playing games that everybody can picture in their head. Cool stuff is happening. Fantasy, heroic role-playing game, right? And so we talked about that and we're like, what are some things that forget what you know about D&D, forget what you know about any other role-playing game you've played. Like between Matt and I, we've probably played 300 different role-playing games and read, even more. And so it was like, from the ground up, you're making a game and it is about heroes. What needs to happen? And we came up with this gameplay loop that is still in the game, right? And that's sort of the only thing that hasn't changed at this point in the game, which was this idea that your hero during a battle should build up their resources. They should build up the things that they are doing, right? Instead of, just to use D&D as a comparison, because I'm going to assume a lot of people are familiar with it, right? Hey, start of a battle, I've got all my spell slots. By the end of the battle, I've, used a bunch of them, and now I want to go take a rest so I can get them back, right? The way it works in DrawSteel, and this was what we came up with during that meeting, was the idea that, like, you start with 0 resources that fuel special powers, like spell slots, right?
Mhm.
But you build up to them during the battle. So you're like, oh, as the battle's going on, it gets more exciting instead of, well, I already did my coolest thing. Now I'm just going to firebolt, right?
Right.
So that idea of like, okay, it gets more dynamic as the battle goes on. There's stuff to look forward to. And then we said, but you know what? That's not enough. There should be something that helps carry you throughout the adventuring day. And we didn't know what that was yet, right? And we did eventually figure it out, but there should be something that not only does each round of combat or round of an exciting action scene get more and more exciting, there should also be something that says, as the story progresses, things are getting more exciting. So each battle is more exciting than the next, not just each round of battle, right? And how do we do that and make it, because we think that heroes press on, right? Heroes don't say, let's hole up in Strahd's parlor and take a quick 8-hour nap because I'd like my 7th level spell slot for when we fight
Yeah.
Strahd, right? Heroes are like, Strahd is through that door, and every moment that we are not stopping Strahd, he could be killing somebody, he could be up to a nefarious scheme, he could just be being gross, peeping on Irina or whatever, right? We got to stop him. And that's what being heroic is. So we wanted to create this mechanic that really supported the fiction of being heroic. And that's when that happened. And we continued to like tinker with it. Like, hey, what if we did this? What if we did this? But it was all conversations, meeting notes, stuff like that. And then this thing happened with the OGL.
Mhm.
We were making 5th edition content at the time, and we were like, oh, we don't know if we're going to continue to make 5th edition content now. And so Matt has likened it to like, hey, we've had this rocket that we're building in the backyard, and then Wizards of the Coast came along and lit it for us. We didn't know when we were going to make DrawSteel. We knew we'd make it eventually, and it was like, well, I guess it's the next project now, and that's how it came to be, the like official launch of it.
That's really cool. Like, is it fair to say that like the building up during combat and of your abilities and of the tension and the hero moment? I mean, is it sort of trying to encapsulate that moment where in the in the movie or the book where the hero's got his sword out and then it gets knocked out of his hand and then he has to sort of he's bleeding all over and he's still got to keep fighting on with whatever he
Yeah.
can get his hands on.
Right. That's when generally that's when the coolest stuff happens, is that
Yeah,
moment of like, oh, I'm bleeding, I'm bloodied. And then, Eowyn says, I am no man, and kills the Witch King, right?
yeah,
It's like, oh, if that happened at the beginning of the battle, we'd be like, cool, everybody go home. Like that
right.
wasn't very dramatic. we got there, right? And so those, or hey, like the chips are really, really down. And that is when Superman, like, right, pulls himself up off the ground out of the rubble, and it's like, oh, now he's doing stuff we've never seen him do before because he's found it within him to continue this fight, right? And so those are, yeah, that's exactly the kind of fiction, right, that we're trying to support. Is like, you want to go a couple rounds with the bad guys before you totally defeat them, right? Like, Die Hard is a very boring movie if in the beginning Bruce Willis
He has
shoots
shoes.
Hans Gruber and it's like, well, now it's done, right? You want to
Yeah.
see the back and forth between him and Hans Gruber, and that's what we want in battles in DrawSteel.
That's awesome. Yeah, cool. So I did want to touch a little bit on the influences for DrawSteel because I
Yeah.
know from following Matt and stuff like that throughout the years, like I know kind of what his books are and some of that stuff. But as far as other TTRPGs and as far as like the aesthetic for the game that you wanted, what were really some of the major influences for that?
Yeah. So we talk a lot about heroic stories. And it's if you there are four of us on the design team full time and a whole boatload of freelancers. And if you ask any of those people what their influences are, there'll be a lot of different things where it's like, well, I like this and I like that. And so there are some things we use broadly, right? Because it's like, well, everybody will understand this, right? If we talk about when we talk about like fantastic heroic stories, we often go to Lord of the Rings because that is a story where, like, Frodo's not bringing the ring to Mount Doom because he's going to get a giant payment from Elrond when he's done, right? Like, he's doing it
Right.
because he's trying to save the world. And
Yeah.
so, and there are all these moments in there where it's like, oh yeah, this cool thing happens and this cool, and you picture it in your head and the cinematicness. So Lord of the Rings becomes like a big touchstone for us in terms of, hey, what is the feel? Similarly, Star Wars, we talk a lot about comic books, right? Heroic comic books that we've read. We've talked a lot about Elric, right? And Stormbringer. We talk about some Terry Pratchett stuff as well. So that's all stuff that is pretty broad that a lot of us can relate to. But in terms of role-playing games, right, we will also look at the mechanics of a bunch of different games and be like, this is amazing the way this works, and how this works is really cool, right? So, one thing that in DrawSteel, right, you don't miss when you make an attack roll, which is not an original idea, right? Like, we're not the first role-playing game to do that. The Into the Odd system, which Mouse Ritter is part of, and Cairn and stuff, they do that already, right? They're already hey, when you're getting attacked, something's happening, forward progress is being made. Powered by the Apocalypse games, Blades in the Dark, Epic Spell Battles, which is not a role-playing game, but it's a board game. They have this 3-tiered system of outcome, right? That we use, that we've drawn influences from for the power roll. And that means that, like, okay, when you're rolling to see how much of an impact your attack makes, you have these 3 different levels it could come out at, right? So, like, we draw a lot of inspiration from there. In terms of customization, in terms of rules, somebody looking at this, I think, would say, like, oh, they've drawn a lot of inspiration from 4th edition D&D, and they'd be right there,
Right.
right? So a lot of stuff there. There's also stuff that, like, I pull from, the Matt pulls from, where it's like, oh, I just love this game. So, like, I'm a huge fan of the Shadow of the Demon Lord system. Shadow of the Weird Wizard, if you don't want horror, Shadow of the Weird Wizard is like the fantasy version. And I think there's a lot of good, slick mechanics that Rob Schwalb has designed in that game that work well. And there was a lot of that in some early DrawSteel stuff. We had Boons and Banes, and they became Edges and Banes, right? And that sort of thing. But so that's a big influence for me personally, where we draw stuff. But when I think too about like heroic things, right, and like what are the stories that we're trying to tell, I really do try to look at like, okay, what are the most heroic kind of action films and novels that we're reading? And a big one for me, I think the Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves movie is actually a DrawSteel movie more than it is a
Wow, that's
Dungeons and
awesome.
Dragons movie. And so for me, right, like when you're watching that, a lot of the things that they're doing, a lot of the way things are working, you heard D&D fans complain like, oh, you can't do that in the game. You can't do that in the game. And it's kind of like, but it's cool, right? It's cool to turn into an owlbear. It's cool to be able to go from one wild shape form right to another and all this kind of stuff. It's cool to have a bard who is maybe non-magical but still effective and does a lot of cool stuff. And that's all stuff that can happen in DrawSteel. We don't have owlbears, right? But we have big monsters that you can turn into if you're a green elementalist, right?
Yeah.
And so and it was funny because we were putting together DrawSteel and that movie came out, and I was like, is it? I think that's a DrawSteel movie. I think they made a DrawSteel movie and they don't know it because DrawSteel isn't out yet. And so for me, that's another one where I was like, this is really cool. That there's some overlap here.
Awesome. Yeah, it's always that moment with players in a lot of games where like, okay, they want to like, I want to run towards the dragon. I want to jump on the back of the dragon. I want to try to cut the dragon's head off, and then I want to do a backflip off of the dragon. And it's like a lot of games don't allow the freedom to do that kind of cool stuff where you have like this dynamic area where you can do more than just move towards the dragon.
Exactly. And we certainly still have, an action economy and
Right.
turn-based combat, right? It's still a tactical game, so you still have to make choices like that. But we give you moves that allow you to like, like one of the things in the movement chapter is like, how do you climb other creatures? Well, we're going to put that in our movement chapter because we know from experience people want to do that. So let's make it a player-facing rule. Let's share how it works, and let's make it easy. Let's make it easy to climb on the back of that dragon because people want to do it, right? And we don't want to get in a situation where we're like, third edition grappling rules, where it's like, well, no one ever actually grapples because it's, so hard to make happen, right? So like, those are the kinds of things. I'm so glad that you use that analogy, because that is exactly the kind of thing we want people to say, like, oh, these are the things I've always wanted to do, and I can do them in DrawSteel. That was our hope.
Yeah, yeah. So if you were going to like uh pitch DrawSteel in terms of someone who might want to play this game, what do you think what sets it apart from I mean, we've already talked about some of the thematic elements that might set it apart, but what do you think a player going into a game store would kind of look for and find in DrawSteel that would be different?
Yeah, I think for me, right, the thing that is most interesting to me that I typically pitch people on is, hey, this is a game where you are going to get stronger as the adventuring day goes on and as each battle goes on, to try to keep the adventure interesting and moving forward, and to have a mechanics that encourage you to be a hero, not just through saying you're a hero, but through actually supporting you and making you do that, right? And so for me, that gameplay loop is crucial. And the other thing we just talked about, which is the hey, look at some of the things you can do. At level 1, if you're a shadow, you can teleport all around the map at will, right? Hey, if you are a green elementalist, right, you can turn into a bunch of different animals and move all over the map, and there's no duration and there's no limit to how often you can do that, and that sort of thing. Hey, if you're a tactician, you can give orders to your friends all the time and make them better in combat and that sort of thing. So to sell them on the like, what you want to do isn't just a sometimes food. You'll be able to do it a lot, and then you'll be able to do the coolest stuff as the day goes on. And that I think if that does not appeal to the person we're talking to, that's also a good pitch, because it means, hey, DrawSteel is probably not for this person. They want to play a
Right.
different kind of game, and we want that too. Like, we want people to, before they spend money on the book, say, no, thank you, right? Not for me.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, and you know, I think there's something to be said for how open you guys have been with the materials and with what you're sharing and all that stuff, because I think that really helps to ground it in the community mindset where like it's like, hey, we're just some gamers who made a game and here it is. You know what I mean? Which I think is great given where the climate is right now, and how things people are sort of all over the place and how they feel about things.
Yeah, it's it is just look, at any period in history, being a human is hard, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just being a person is difficult, and I think a lot of times at MCDM, what we want to do, and this has been our design philosophy, even on our 5e stuff, is like there's there's no magic about game design, right? There is a magic we feel when we're creating games because it's fun, and it's interesting, and we feel a sense of accomplishment, right? But like, there's nothing that we're doing that is a proprietary recipe or a trade secret or anything like that. And so we like to be very open about not only what we're doing, but why we made the decision to do the things that we did, right?
Mhm.
So often in the book, through playtesting, we'll get a lot of questions about like, why does this work like this? Or why does this work like that? And it's like, well, you know what? So many people are asking that. We should just explain it. Throw a sidebar down there that says, this is why this game has so many skills. Or put in a section that talks about like, hey, this is how the negotiation rules in DrawSteel are intended to be used, right? Don't let people guess at that, and don't assume that that just the mechanics of your rules are written clearly enough that people will get it. That would be great. But everybody's different. Everybody learns in different ways. Why not give people the information about like, this is the way this works? Because then you can decide, if you understand, for instance, how we think you should deploy the negotiation rules, that helps you know, oh, well, they don't really intend it for this situation, so it may not work. Or I do want to use it for this situation that it's not intended for, so I can change the rules,
Mm.
and maybe it'll work this way, right?
Right.
Those are the kinds of things that are just going to make everybody's game better. So why not
Right.
share that? And that's the development process has been like that, which has been great, because it's been like, hey, here's a version of the game. Uh-oh, here's a new version of the game, and here's why we changed it. And here's a new, like, and what's really been cool is that now we see people online when now that the game is closer to coming out and there's more previews and stuff like that, people will say, well, why is it like this? And we don't have to say anymore. There are enough people who know, because we've been open about it, who come and say, well, they tried it that way that you're suggesting, and it didn't actually work, and here's why, and this is what they wanted to do. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's so cool. And I wasn't a thing that I thought, like, we didn't think like, oh, other people will go out and explain our message for us. But it is a happy side effect of it that has been really cool.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that, you've made it very clear in some of the playtest materials and things like that, that like this is sort of a skeleton from which you can tell a lot of different types of stories, and I think that's really important for the longevity of someone who plays the game, because I know that like me and my friends, when we play, the more we play a game, the more we're like, what if we could do this instead, or how could we monkey with this and do this weird thing or tell this interesting story, and so that's really good that you guys emphasize that in the book so that people aren't like, especially new players, aren't like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta learn all these rules and I gotta get it right."
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think that's the big thing, right? Like, there's so much stuff that I've learned making 5e stuff with MCDM. We put out the talent class, and when we put out the public playtest of that, there were a lot of DMs who were like, "Oh, I would never allow this because I'd have to read all 100 pages of this, and I don't have time to read 100 pages." And it was so funny because Matt and I run our games the same way, where it's like, if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I want to use this," I don't feel the need to approve it first, right? What I say to them
Right.
is like, "Okay, great. By the way, if it becomes a problem, we'll have a conversation. Like, if it's clearly OP, or if it's not powerful enough, or you're just not having a good time, let's make sure we talk about it so that everybody at the table has a good time. And that's enough, right? Like we don't have to have an approval process where I read it. God, that sounds like homework for me. And I understand why the people who operate that way were like, no, thank you. Right. And so I think we put a little bit of ourselves into the game in that respect too, where Matt writes things about like, no, you don't have to know everybody's powers. That's not your job in DrawSteel. Your job in DrawSteel is to facilitate the game, and that's a big enough job. You don't need to memorize character sheets too. That's your player's job. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like how do you feel about the accessibility of the game in terms of new players? Like, is this a game you would recommend to people who've never played a TTRPG before? Is it a little crunchy? So maybe I don't know.
Yeah, that is a really, really good question. And the answer is just diving into the core rule books as your first RPG. I don't know that that is a great idea. We are assuming, because of our audience, because of the makeup of the role playing game industry, that this is going to be a lot of people's second first RPG.
Right.
And so, like, we don't have a what is a role playing game section in this book, for instance. The same way Monopoly doesn't explain to you what a board game is, right?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
we're sort of assuming that if you found DrawSteel, you already have an idea. However, we've definitely had playtests already where people said, "Hey, this is the first time somebody played." Now, with the caveat that like there's varying degrees. Like if somebody has played a bunch of computer RPGs, right? They could probably jump into DrawSteel just fine. But if this is like their first time really rolling dice or playing a role playing game, I would recommend for DrawSteel that they start with our starter set that's coming out, and we have built it in such a way that it's going to introduce you like, hey, you don't have a full first level character. First level character in DrawSteel is pretty complex. We wanted it to feel heroic, give you a lot of tactical choices. You don't have that many when you play the Delian Tomb, which is our starter set, because it's like, hey, you just start with like half the sheet. And then each battle for the first 4 battles, we add a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And then we add in the negotiation rules. And then we add in, stuff like that. And that is going to be how we introduce new players, right? Because we do want to have an onboarding ramp. But so we need to make sure that our language and this is our general manager has been on this, right? Like, it's like, hey, if you're new to DrawSteel, you're new to role-playing games, start here. And here
Right.
is our starter set box, right? The Delian Tomb. And then it's like, and the Delian Tomb, it's like, hey, did you love this? You can check out the core books. You can continue on your adventure with these things, right? That sort of thing. So we do want to have good onboarding. And I do think the best way to onboard new people is going to be through the Delian Tomb. And we wrote it with that in mind because we know the core game is very crunchy. And like, I think it's fine if you've played D&D or Pathfinder or similar D20 fantasy role-playing games to jump right into the core rules. But if you haven't, if you've really never played a role-playing game, I think the Delian Tomb is the best bet for people to start.
I noticed, I mean, also you guys had released the sort of class tutorials that you guys had out. I wonder, do you guys see that being part of that starter set, since like the classes are so different from any TTRPG, like in terms of like the way abilities work and also just what they are, like the archetype of it?
That's the hope, yeah, is that we can put out something that there's a, hey, here's a good cheat sheet that you can keep next to you. Here is something that explains how different classes work and like what the idea behind them is. Yeah, we want to do all that stuff with the Delian Tomb, not just these broken down character sheets, but class guides. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So, why D10s? Like, what was I know that was kind of an evolution, and I'm just curious philosophically, like, what did you guys find out that D10s bring emotionally or mechanically to the game that really was like, yeah, this is it?
Yeah, so D10s, we actually worked kind of backwards to get to D10s. We didn't start with D10s. We started actually with this idea that like, what if we made funky dice is what we were calling them, but they're dice without numbers on the side. They have symbols instead. If you've played the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game,
Yeah.
you know, maybe you've seen them. And so we were doing all these things. Okay, these are successes, these are failures, these are successes, these are surges. This is what a critical hit symbol, right? We did all this stuff. And maybe it should have 12 sides. Maybe it should have 6. Maybe it should have one should have 6, one should have 8, one should have 12, one should have 4, right? Like back and forth, all this kind of stuff. And I have a spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet of like, now the dice is this many sides, and here's what's on each side. Now the dice is, and we got to a place where we're like, all right, this feels good. This feels real, real good. And it was at that point we kind of had a binary pass-fail system for skills, and we were just dealing damage on a dice roll. We didn't have this 3-tiered outcome yet. And I was like, all right, let me run the number for what the odds are. And I was like, oh, this is the same as rolling 2d6. Like these, if we tweak the game in this way, we could just tell people they can roll 2 6-sided die, numbered 1 to 6 on each side. And we should probably do that because, again, accessibility, like, talk about the most common dice people have in their house are 6-sided die, right?
Yeah.
And so we started to use that. And while we were using that, it was like, something's not right here in terms of the pass fail, because essentially 2d6, right? A d20 is a great die because it swings a lot, right? The odds of you getting a 1 are the same odds of you getting a 20 and every number in between, right? 2d6, that's not how the dice work, right? The odds of you getting a 7 are highest, and then it fans out from there and sort of what we would, as many people call a bell curve with 2 dice. It's actually a pyramid shape, but who cares?
Right.
And so that pyramid shape, we were like, all right, well, what do we do here? And so we eventually we tried a bunch of different stuff, and eventually we came up with the idea for the power roll. Now, the problem with the power roll is now 2d6, 3 different levels of outcome. That's powered by the apocalypse, basically, right?
Yeah.
Our levels of outcome were slightly different, but like that's powered by the apocalypse. Powered by the apocalypse is not a game that has like a huge distinction. Most powered by the apocalypse games, I shouldn't say powered by the apocalypse because that's a whole genre of things, right? But many powered by the apocalypse games don't have a giant distinction mathematically between, hey, a starting character and a character who's played 50 sessions and has, a bunch of experience points and is, in general, a powered by the apocalypse character, they might have a stat or 2 go up by 1, right? And then they get more abilities that are kind of all on the same level. So they become broader in terms of their capabilities, but they don't get like deeper in terms of power. They get a little deeper, but not totally. DrawSteel is a heroic fantasy game. We expect you to get deeper. We expect you to go from being, Frodo at the beginning of The Lord of the Rings to Frodo at the end of Lord of the Rings, right? Which there's a significant jump in his capability.
So sad and with PTSD.
Exactly, right? Matt would often say, like, you're going to go from Captain America at first level to being Thor at 10th level, right? Which is the final level in our game right now. And so, and what we realized was like, oh, when you have 3 levels like that and you're rolling 2 6-sided die, the math is super tight, right? Because you have 3 different, it's not just pass or fail, you have these 3 different levels. And so, and it's a tactical game. And in order for a tactical game to work, you often want to have a lot of chances to get like little bonuses and stuff like that. And so we're like, we need to broaden the array of possibilities to make high level play work better. And so that's how we arrived at 2d10. And so we really did work backwards. And it's funny, the meeting where we said we had to broaden things, I had said to Matt, I think we need to try 2d8. And he said, just go to 2d10. That's where we're going to end up anyway. And so it is funny because obviously we used to work in a d20 system quite a bit, and now we're at this 2d10 system, and people are like, well, 2d10 is just the same as rolling a d20. It's like, it's not. It's a chair. But I understand why people think that way. And all I can say is we arrived there honestly, right? We arrived there in the most honest way we can. If we had known that we would arrive there, I definitely would have started there at the beginning.
Yeah, right. It's like you went around the goal and came back to it.
Yeah.
At any point during the sort of dice conversations, like, because kind of sort of transitioning to like the evolution of TTRPGs, the hobby, and also just the mechanical nature of games in general that we're seeing right now. There's games like Daggerheart. There's all these
Oh
new
yeah.
games coming out where everybody's trying different things. Everybody's trying different dice, and I wonder, was it ever a part of the equation to be like, well, also we just want it to be different than D20?
Huh. We actually had the opposite conversation at the beginning, where there were some members of the team who were like, we should not do anything that isn't a D20 because that's what our audience knows, and it would be a bad idea to do that, right? And it was like, well, let's try it, right? We've got time, we've got years before this game comes out. Let's try it and see how people react and see what they say. And there certainly were some people who were like, I just love the way a D20 rolls. Can't there please be a D20, right? But those were few and far between. And a lot of those
Right.
people got on board because in many ways, rolling 2 dice is just as fun. And we had a dice funder where we made uh, uh, 20-sided dice numbered 1 to 10 twice, right? So if you want to roll a 20-sided die, like that's your main concern. And that seems to be people's main concern is they like the way a 20 rolls. They like literally love the sound it makes and like watching it roll across the game. And like, listen, if that's what you find fun about playing a game, that's great. I find putting on a funny voice and pretending to be an elf fun. And there's no wrong that my fun is not more valid than the person who loves rolling a 20-sided die. No, let's make some 20-sided dice that they can roll. They're just numbered 1 to 10 twice, right? And now you get to roll 2 of them all the time. And so but we did have that conversation about like are people, especially when it was funky dice, are people really going to be turned off by this? And it was like, well, we should just include funky dice with the game when you buy it. If right, like if you buy there's a lot of games that are not role-playing games that, like, if you buy, Yahtzee comes with dice. It's not just a cup and a
Right.
book, right? And so we were like, okay, well, the dice will come with the game then, if that's
Mhm.
the way we go. We ended up not going that way. But yeah, that's probably the biggest thing, right? Is that so we never said we're gonna do this just to be different, right? What
Mhm.
we have done a lot is start from first principles, meaning that like we really thought about like what dice would support a heroic narrative, and that's how we started with funky dice and went from there. We get a lot of feedback sometimes that's like, why did you change the way X works? The way X
Mhm.
works is the way something works in D&D, and it's like, well, we never changed that. It was never ours to begin with, and
Right.
we never talked about that. We said, what is the purpose of skills in our game? Should we have skills? How do they work? Why do we need them? And then we went from there. We didn't say, let's get rid of the athletic skill because we never had one, right? That kind of thing. Yeah.
So how do you see DrawSteel sort of fitting into the sort of evolution of the hobby? Like, as it sort of broadens out, it's more popular than ever. People know a lot of these games by name, even if they don't play them. And so, we see a lot of different changes. A lot of it sparked by the OGL thing, where it was like everybody was like, okay, we gotta broaden our horizons a little bit so we're not stuck to one system or one thing. So how do you see, like, where do you see DrawSteel fitting into that?
Yeah. So my hope for DrawSteel, right, is that like I don't. There's a lot of people who, because you make a fantasy game, and because you were making 5e stuff, and now you're not, they think that we think we're going to like dethrone D&D, right? Or and that is not at all what we think is going to happen or what we expect to happen. I still play D&D with people often. I still enjoy playing D&D with people. I got a lot of friends who make D&D stuff that I would like them to continue to have their jobs, right? And what success looks like for Hasbro and Dungeons and Dragons is very different than what success looks like for MCDM, right? Like people have said to us, aren't you afraid having a game that's tactical like 4th edition D&D, aren't you afraid you'll only sell as many copies as 4th edition? And I was like, what? I hope that would be amazing. That would be beyond our wildest dreams if we sold as many copies as 4th edition, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, when I think about like what is it that I hope and expect of DrawSteel, it's hard because I don't like I want what everybody wants for their creation, which is for people to like it and people to play it. That's already happening, even though the game isn't out, because of playtesting and early releases and Patreon and stuff. And so I'm really excited that that is occurring and that people are going. My next hope for it would be that it has a life to continue to support MCDM, and that people like the supplements and the adventures that are coming out for it next. And that people have a really good time playing DrawSteel with their friends. And this is a thing that I know as a gamer and that I've seen years and years of working and just being part of the hobby, is like, if we can convince people to try DrawSteel as their second game, that means that they will try a third. There's like once you get people to try that second game, what happens is they realize, like, oh, it's not as hard to learn this game. Learning D&D as your first game, the first role-playing game, is hard. The concept of a role-playing game you have to wrap your mind around. Just that is a hard activity. Then there's all these rules, there's all this stuff, right? But now, coming into DrawSteel, there's a lot of stuff you're just going to intrinsically understand. You'll be able to pick that up. And then you'll think, oh, you know what? Well, I've always wanted to try a superhero or an investigative or a romance RPG. I think I could do that because this is easy. And then you'll discover, like, hey, there's a million Powered by the Apocalypse games. Once I learn how to play that, I know how to play all these games, right? And that kind of thing. So my hope for games like DrawSteel and Daggerheart is that we become a gateway for people who are eager to play a second RPG, for them to play a third and a fourth, and so on after that. That's my big hope for us. And I also hope that DrawSteel is around for a long time, and that, you know, eventually people are mad about how old the rules are, and MCDM makes a second edition, and, you know, like all that kind of stuff. I definitely hope to.
Yeah, I think I saw a PSA about TTRPGs and how don't listen to your friends when they tell you to play TTRPGs, because it's a gateway, and you'll spend all your money and you'll end up destitute.
Exactly. Yeah. If you know what, here's the big thing about DrawSteel. If DrawSteel can get you out there to pull that book off your shelf that you bought on Kickstarter 5 years ago and haven't opened up, then we've done a good job. That's success for me.
Cool. Well, just sort of wrapping up, I wanted one of my favorite unique parts about the game are the descriptive titles for things, like the titles for the powers, the titles for some of the resources and stuff.
Oh,
You
thank
know,
you.
like, I think it's the Fury that has a power that's I think the descriptor is just like, your enemies will get out of the way whether they want to or not. And I was just curious, like, is there one of those that kind of stands out in your mind as like your favorite sort of like uh, descriptive text or title of a power or something like that that makes you chuckle?
Oh, there's a lot. And I have to give credit where credit is due. That is Matt directly,
Mhm.
right? He goes over the names of everything, he does that sort of stuff, but he also leads us and teaches us into how to do that stuff, right? And so for mm, uh for me, there is, I love the power. So the shadow has this power called hesitation as weakness that lets them mix up the turn order and basically go whenever they want, right? And in every game that I have ever played that has a shadow in it, they wait. You can see it happen. They wait for the director who's running the game to say, okay, and now, you know, the goblin is going to go, and then they say hesitation is weakness, and they come in, and they come in. And so that is probably my favorite, just because I love to hear people say it at the table, right? When people are saying the names and stuff, and that happens with a bunch of them. But hesitation and weakness is clearly the one that people relish the most, because they and it's just so evocative, right? It's such an evocative thing. It's a heroic thing to say, and it's also like a little bit of an edgy thing to say. So it's cool. I really like that. Yeah.
Cool. So the big question is, what should people look out for in terms of the game being available and things like that? How are you guys looking in terms of that
Uh,
stuff?
Yeah, so July 17th is the current slated day for us to release the PDF version. And I think the print version will go on sale. And our hope is to start sending people books then shortly after that in late summer and early. They'll continue to go out through early fall, right? Because we got a lot of books to deliver and they're all over the world and stuff.
Right.
But yeah, that's the hope is that July 17th is when the PDFs will come out, and they will go to the printer shortly after, and then they will start getting printed, and they will go out to folks. The Delian Tomb, our hope is the Delian Tomb will also be out that day, the starter set adventure, and a free adventure with pre-gens that people can run at cons and game stores and stuff like that, called The Road to Broadhurst. So people can check that out. That is all at like drawsteel.com. We'll have all that information and be available for folks if that's what they're interested in. So yeah.
How can people get involved with MCDM projects if they want to get involved and support you guys, things like that?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. So mcdmproductions.com is our website. We have a Patreon. The Patreon is, hey, if you want to see how the sausage gets made, you can go there. We do a lot of play testing through Patreon. We do a lot of blog posting, art previews. We do Q&As, live stream Q&As and stuff there. So people can check out there. It's $8 a month to become an MCDM Plus member and get access to that. You'll also get access to like back issues of Arcadia and a whole bunch of other stuff if you go on there. You can also come check us out on Discord, MCDM .gg/discord will take you to our Discord. If you are a patron, you can link your patron and Discord accounts. There are some exclusive channels there just for patrons, but there's also channels for anybody, even if you're not a patron, where you can come get announcements. You can talk about whatever you want. If you just want to talk about Matt's videos, that's there. If you want to talk about our 5e stuff, that has channels. If you want to talk about DrawSteel, there's stuff there. And it's a really, really nice community. Our moderators are incredible. A guy named Lord Durak is king of the mods and just does an amazing job and has built an amazing community. So yeah, that's where you can go check it out.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, James. I look forward to seeing the book and getting to play some cinematic, heroic, and strategic fantasy. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mo. I really appreciate you having me on, and thank you to all your people who are out there being part of this audience. So that means a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you.